is Alex.
And my name is Betta.
And we're the Koniugi. And today we're going to talk to Mr. Russell Cox. He's a star in the triathlon world, internet triathlon world, with his website Coachcox. And today he's going to tell us about his secrets and how he came to work on this website and how to use the website. Okay, so join us now with Mr. Russell Cox. So first of all, I would like to talk about you, and this is about you. Okay, you have been in my focus for a few years now. So I will start saying how I got to know you. There was a coach in Italy, Simone Diamantini, and during a training camp, he talked about qualifying to Kona, age group, timing, and stuff like that. So I said, where did he get his data? So I went into the web, and the first thing that came out was your website. Yeah. So I started studying your website a lot and other things. And I have to say that I qualified twice to Kona, and a good part of choosing the right race for me was thanks to your website. So thank you. So I'd like to, if you can tell us about how you got into the triathlon and then coaching and doing the website and stuff like that.
I got into triathlon when I was a website developer. Actually, I built websites and software professionally, and triathlon and sport became my hobby to get me out of the desk, away from the desk, and keep me and to get me fit. In my early 20s, I was sat at a desk at a computer all the time, and gaining weight, not very healthy. And I decided I wanted to change things, and started to get fitter. Got into triathlon, got quite obsessed with it. And then I took a few years out. I took a break from work and I went traveling, and just went racing and doing Ironman races all around the world, and qualified for Kona myself a couple of times. And I came back from that, and I didn't really want to go back to my old job or that kind of job anymore. And I wanted to stay in the world of triathlon. So I sort of started moving into coaching and started coaching people. Mostly, 90% of the people I work with are looking at Ironman or Ironman 70.3 as their main goals. Okay. And the website, it's been a lot of things. I mean, to be honest, it started out when I was traveling. The website was my blog originally. That's the first website I was doing in triathlon, was a blog just talking about my racing and my experience and that sort of thing. And then it started talking about how to train for Ironman, and as I got into coaching about 8 years ago, I was looking at numbers from race results, and I can't remember what particularly triggered the start of it, but for some reason or other, I decided I'd take the results off of the Ironman website, put them in a spreadsheet, and make graphs out of them and things like that to have a look at them. I think it was, everyone talks about, or certainly lots of people in Ironman are talking about, what do I need to do to go under 10 hours, say. That's a common one. Or, to Kona qualify, obviously, or all sorts of other milestones or marks for different people, depending on, their age, that sort of thing as well. And what we all did, and I know when I was qualifying and racing, is we'd go to the Ironman website and we'd look at race results there. And we kind of make notes or copy stuff into spreadsheets a bit and try and track and work out timing for races. And so I was sort of playing about with that. And then I started, having got one race, I thought, well, actually, I could get them all quite easily. And so I started to get them all. And once you've got them all, you can start to think about how it looks as a bigger picture, not just how one or two races look. And I think the common thing that happens when you as an athlete go and look at just individual race results, your own kind of bias comes into play, and you will look at these results and you'll look for patterns you fear are expecting. So I also wanted to see what it really looked like, what the numbers actually looked like
Yeah, because the good thing about your website that I couldn't find, you know, even the Ironman website was the, like it's a stupid things, but you know, how many slots do each race has? I mean, not all the races in the Ironman website actually shows you how many slots per age group they have. So this is one of the things that I found extremely useful in your website. And in some races, I think you also have the last qualifier. Like say a race has like 5 slots for my age group. Not always the 5th is the one that get the last slot.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another common thing that is very difficult to understand. So you're saying that your background was in website development. So this is, and how difficult was it for you to go from website development to triathlon coaching?
Yes. Much of that change, they are very different worlds, and much of it came about from me having that break and being away from it. I spent 2 or 3 years just doing triathlon, and during that time I didn't really do any of the kind of old work that I'd done before. I did, like I say, I had a blog, but it was just a basic blog, and you know, I made it look a bit like what I wanted it to look like, but I wasn't kind of developing any kind of software or any kind of systems in it to make it do anything special. It was just a blog. So I spent a number of years just really with my head just in triathlon, and you know, I went and trained with different people, this sort of thing. I did some coaching courses and that over the time, and then sort of started to make that shift over to coaching when I decided, well, you know what, I'm going to try and do that. I basically returned to the UK, and I kind of said to myself, if I can make this work in a year, then I stick with it. If I can't, then obviously I need to look back at computer. You know, I coach a lot of people through Ironman every year or over the years. I'm head coach for the local club where I live, and then I obviously do all this statistics stuff as well, which is kind of like a side, kind of partly feeds into the coaching, doesn't always. You know, there's a lot of elements of that. So kind of there's different strands there, but yeah, I try and focus what I do with the statistics and that as well in ways that are useful for coaching or for people in triathlon.
Tell us about your new project.
One of the things that I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's only really with the advent of lockdown and being stuck indoors a lot, and just changes to routines, that I actually thought I'd actually started to give it a go. What I wanted to do was basically put the data that I use to generate my statistics into a live setting so that people can go and actually see the data, and see some of the stuff that I put on the website when I do an analysis post after a race. I wanted to make it so it was just there and ready anytime. And yeah, so a couple of months ago, I started thinking about this. I thought I'd actually give it a go. I pondered this over the years, but always felt it might be just too big a job to start to dive into. I might end up, you know, not having the time to do it, but I found myself with more time to do this sort of thing. And as I got into it, I've been able to get through the kind of challenges more easily, more readily than I expected. I think. So it's gone much better than I expected. And so the last few weeks, I've put stuff up on the website live now, which means that basically the database I've built up of results is all accessible on my website now. You can go and view results for any race. You can kind of look at some of the statistics for those races, sort of average times you can go and see the average times for everyone in the top 20 in every age group. See where they lie, who got Kona slots with those, what the average splits are for Kona slots. Like say what the last qualifying time is, what I call the last automatic qualifying time. So that's basically that is that if there's 5 slots, that's what the 5th place time is. So I started putting up all this data, and I'm slowly expanding it. The other interesting thing that came about is Ironman redesigned their website. While the performance for a human is much worse now, and getting any information off the Ironman website takes a lot of work if you're a person clicking, If it's a machine doing it and it knows where to go, I found that I can suddenly get all of the results very quickly. So when they did the redesign, I ended up downloading every race result that they housed in their database and made sure my database had everything in it. I've taken a copy of all their data and I've run it through, put it into my database. And that means I can generate all the statistics I generate for any race, for any race that Ironman has results for. Now, the interesting thing with that was they also include every athlete who's raced Ironman has a unique ID that Ironman used to recognize the races they've done together. Now, with older athletes like myself, when I was racing like a decade ago doing Ironman, the ID isn't so good. And sometimes my account, for example, with them is split into 3. But with newer races, it looks to be quite consistent. But what it means is if you go to a race, you could also click on the names of qualifiers or anyone in the race, and you'll go to a page which will list all the results that Ironman have for them.
That's exactly what I do. But I wanted to hear your opinion, and so maybe you can talk about what you do when you do consultancy for Kona qualification. So this is what I do. Let's say that I want to race New Zealand, okay? And the last qualifier in New Zealand in my age group did, I don't know, 9 hours and 30 minutes. That doesn't tells me a lot if I don't know that person, how good it is in other races that I know about.
Sure.
Right. So this is what I do exactly. I look at the name and look at the races is done in the previous years, maybe Kona, and so I can compare my time with his or her time in their case. Well, you don't have that problem. But so and so this is why it's very useful. You know what the last development you've done. So tell us about your consultancy.
So the consultancy thing, I've started that up early in the year, and I think I have pieces of software that trawl through my database. And if you come to me for consultancy, you can give me a race to identify you by. So once I've identified you in the database, I can then start to look at your results, pick out your best results and times, and start to cross-reference them to all the other races out there. Start to see how your best performances stand in those races.
That's amazing.
What differences there are. And then there are other interesting things that I'm working on at the moment, which is because I can tell where everyone has raced and I can see connections between people racing in different races. I can start to connect all these races together in like a web, a kind of matrix of data, and look at the differences between everyone's race at different events. Now, obviously, some people have terrible races some days, some people have amazing races. So any one result may be a good day, a bad day, whatever. But once you start looking at everyone's results and trying to compare them, you start to build up a picture of how these races tend to compare to each other.
Is that more or less what Tree Rating is doing in its website?
Torsten's site,
yes,
the pro one. So Torsten does he's doing something a bit like that in that he's trying to adjust the course based on. See, it's a way of normalizing the data to try. Effectively, what you're trying to do is almost say is kind of like a standard profile, so that all races kind of line up, and you can say, well, based on all the results across all that people have achieved across different races. Yeah, I've done something like this a long time ago, where you say this is your kind of standard race result, and these races deviate from standard by this much. Ironman Lanzarote or Ironman Wales are much slower.
Yes.
Ironman Florida or Frankfurt or something is much faster than standard. So you start to get these pictures of how the races compare, and the idea is then you can feed that back into to picking your race and say, this is the events I've done. If I've done, I don't know, 9 hours 30 on Ironman France. Actually, that'd be quite quick there. But I'd say that's your time there. But you could then go and look at this standardization and say, that's probably around a 9:15 here, or a 9:10. Or maybe in Lanzarote, it's like a 9:50 or 9:55 or something. And it starts to give you this picture of where that might stand. And then the other ideas I've got around that is starting to use other bits of data to try and score races. So the idea would be is if I'm trying to pick a qualifier, I've got all these comparisons of time. I know races I've done before. I know where I've placed before, and I can start to say, well, this race is like an A grade race. This is a B grade race, C grade race for me. Yes. Because I think ultimately with any of this, it's not, you're never going to be able to boil it down to having like an equation that spits out a race at the end, and this is your race that is absolutely the one you can qualify at. No other will work for you. But you might be able to have something that says these races are your kind of A races. You've got good chance here, but avoid these races. And I'd like to feed in some sort of other data into that. So, you know, if someone says, I don't like riding in heels, then, you know, the A races probably shouldn't include the really hilly races, because for them, mentally at least, that's not something they're good at preparing for. That's not necessarily to say it's a bad race for them necessarily, but it's not one they're going to naturally want to race for, and they may struggle to train for it if hills suddenly become the big factor in their training when they don't like that. So kind of putting some of those kind of qualifying details in as well would be the long-term aim. Now, the kind of software side is not quite there, but it's doing quite a bit of that. But not the kind of rating stuff, and only some of the cross-referencing. But with the consultancy, the other thing I do, if people want it, is they can have me write up a review of it, which is where I look at the data and give my thoughts and opinions, which, you know, is obviously an opinion, but it will factor in the fact that for the last 8 years, every single Ironman race that's happened, I've reviewed the data, produced graphs, and written some kind of summary of how the race
no one knows the data better than you. That's
yeah. So you know, it's kind of like most of these races, I have spent time looking at their results, seeing how they compare. I've seen what happens in different years and that. So you know, I can put some of that kind of qualifying information around it for people, because that's what I've done a lot of. So that's the broad idea with the consultancy, and it's really there to help people who are kind of trying to trawl through this massive data to kind of get to some decisions. You know, I'm not going to come away and give you one race and say that's your race. I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 that I think would be your best choices, and I'm going to note if, you know, there are things you should consider about them. You know, one of the common ones that I've encountered is people will go and look at times and they see something like Malaysia, Ironman Malaysia, and think, wow, that race is slow. People qualify, but that's it. It's hot. It's incredibly hot, and most people don't race well in the heat unless they live in that kind of heat and humidity. And even then, you know, not everyone races well, even when they're acclimatized. So, you know, it's very easy to also look at the data and forget that there are reasons why different courses have different times. And part of that is who's come to compete. The other part is what that course is like.
So nowadays, how difficult it is to qualify for Kona?
I think at the moment it has been getting more difficult. And I think it varies a little bit over the years. And it's not just a simple case of it's got harder and harder every year. I think in particular, one of the things that's happened in the last 3 years, the size of Kona's remained the same. Prior to that, for about 7, 8 years, the number of athletes at Kona was growing. So initially, when we got a lot more races coming in, we also just had more qualifying spots. But that's kind of leveled out for a few years. Competition has changed, definitely. My feel is age groupers, certainly qualifying age groupers, are more and more focused now in how they approach it. You know, if I think back to when I qualified, power meters were a thing, but they weren't something that everyone owned. Whereas nowadays, you know, not everyone owns it, but you know, so many athletes have power meters, heart rate monitors, GPS, everything's being tracked and recorded. People are kind of using that data, trying to be focused. They're measuring everything, trying to really, the game's become much more serious. With that, it means the kind of margin for error is much smaller nowadays. And I think you go to a race and you can't afford mistakes, because the people you're up against have all chosen their equipment with great care, trained as hard as you for months. You know, they've been using all these devices to measure what they're doing, potentially, you know, for many of them. And you know, that if, unless they make a mistake, they have a good idea what they're going to do as well. So you have that. Now, I don't think it's ever been easy as such, but certainly it feels like now you've got to have the right day. It's all got to work. And, you know, I coach people, I get people to Kona most years, but there's no guarantee. And I've never, you know, no coach can guarantee something, but it always feels to me when I'm with Kona qualifiers, I can have an athlete fit enough, in my opinion, that they're at that level where they should be able to.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, when one of them goes into race, yeah, because I don't track them on the day anymore now. I don't like to look on the day. I like to look later in the evening or the next day and just see what happened. I just don't want to have the stress of knowing that day what's going. So I tend not to use the tracker for an athlete who's right on the cusp in particular, because I don't want to know. I don't want to see it going wrong.
Yeah.
I just want to be able to, if it is, you know. I think it's very challenging. I think fitness levels have to be there across the board nowadays. There's not room for the kind of, you know, there used to be times you get the Uber cyclist who could just about run, you know, and they smash the bike course and then get round the run and still be in with a slot. That doesn't really happen now. And I think, you know, and actually, you know, the other factor is, you know, for the women's field, it's an interesting one as well, because you do have to win your age group generally, as a rule. So you really have to be at that level, you know. It feels for me like for the women, it's not that it's necessarily harder as such. In that, yeah, there are fewer women racing, but the impact of one other good woman, you know, one other top level age grouper in your age group turning up is, you know, that could be the difference. You know, it's who has the better day. So I think there's slightly less margin for error in the women's field, because of the lower slot numbers mean that all it takes is one or two other potentials to be there, and that's it. You know, it comes down to whose day goes best. And yeah, that's true for men as well. But when you've got an age group which has 4 or 5 slots, there's a little bit more margin for error. But you've still got to be able to kind of get up to that level.
Last question.
Yeah.
So according to what is said, apart from, you know, studying your website thoroughly, what advice would you get to an age group that wants to qualify for Kona? Just one single advice.
Time is the thing. I think almost everyone who I've coached to it, it's a process that takes time. If you're new to Ironman or triathlon, you're not likely to just jump straight in and be there. You know, for most people, it takes time, consistency of training in that time, and just keeping working at it without kind of deviating from the course. I would say the people I've coached to Kona, the kind of consistent trait for me is that they just do the training every week. And the only other question is, could we be doing a bit more, or are we doing exactly the right balance here? They don't tend to show off in training. They're not the kind who do lots of flashy sessions and suddenly you'll see them, you know, they're not constantly throwing in, I did an extra, you know, set of intervals because I felt great all the time. They just kind of do what was there. That seems to me to be the most consistent thing. Now, obviously, they've reached a level of fitness with that, and that doesn't just happen magically in you know, one season if they weren't at a level already. But where I'm working with people for a few seasons and we're building up to it, or you know, someone who's near comes in and starts working on it, is that consistency. If they do that week in, week out until race day, that's a really good sign for me. that they kind of got that mentality that just gets you through, and their race will be, in some way, their race will be boring because they just go out and they do each stage
what they know
as they need to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's it. And, you know, there's no kind of fireworks there. There's no kind of sprinting for the line or anything. They just go and they knock out a swim, a bike and a run right at the level they need to. They eat the food they need to, and they finish as we planned. That's kind of what happens, hopefully.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure meeting.
That's all right.
And I hope we can talk again in the future.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Nice to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice evening.
All right.
Okay,
Ciao.
thanks.
Bye,
Ciao,
bye.
bye-bye.